And we are officially starting the webinar, and we are officially recording. Hello, everybody. I hope this is working on the other end there. This is my first time using Zoom webinars. So I think yes, I looked over to the other screen. It is working. Wonderful. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 5th iteration of Lightroom Classic Live. My name is Jason Bradley. I'm the host tonight, and we have a very special guest who I will introduce shortly. But before we do, I wanted to just kind of introduce myself to you all. We have some returning people, and then we have a lot of new faces. So for those of you that don't know me, again, my name is Jason Bradley. I am based in Monterey, California, and I am broadcasting this from my gallery and studio and budding photographic center in downtown Pacific Grove, which is the small town that sandwiches Monterey and Pebble Beach, and is sandwiched by, I should say, those towns and Carmel. And here in the center of my gallery, and the photographic center is, we do a lot of different stuff here. One of the big things we do is we are a fine art print lab. And we make metal prints and canvas wraps, and we have a whole line of paper prints, and we do all kinds of stuff. In addition to that, we teach photography. We lead trips about photography, and we have lots of events that we do, some in the gallery and some outside the gallery. So to give you a quick example of some of that, let me share my screen here, and I'll move over to this screen. For those of you that are local, on September 16th, we have a photo walk that's led by a couple of our staff members here, Joe Placco and Effie Benjamin, in the Monterey Harbor. We're going to be getting up and getting to the harbor early in the morning to photograph all kinds of things there. And we have it's kind of special down there right now in that we have a huge influx of sea lions hugging the shorelines of the harbor. So bring your long lenses to do some portraits of some sea lions, or don't, because the sea lions are so close to everybody. You can get right up in their faces with just kind of a mid-range lens. So check out that on our website at either bradleyprintservices.com or bradleyphotographic.com to sign up for that. Following that that day, we have a new exhibit opening up here at the gallery, which I'm calling Faces of Kenya. It's a whole bunch of images that I've taken for the last few years while visiting Kenya. And that's on one wall. And on the other wall, we have a showcase, a client showcase that we're exhibiting of images taken by photographers that either have printed through us or have done our workshops. And then following that, in October, on October 15th, if any of you want a deeper dive into Lightroom, what we're doing here is, kind of a fun, casual overview of certain topics in Lightroom. But if you want a deeper dive, on October 14th, we'll be doing an all-day workshop on the Develop module in Lightroom, and you can sign up for that on our website. Again, bradleyphotographic.com or bradleyprintservices.com. And then for locals, October 15th, we are doing a whale watch on the vessel sanctuary out of Moss Landing. This is the time of year for humpback whale photography. They are lunging, they are breaching, they are feeding on anchovies in the bay. There's lots of dolphins out there, and fingers crossed, the occasional orcas that come in as well. So that is happening. And then couple more little things. Another Lightroom workshop happening December 9th. This one is going to be focusing on organization in Lightroom. Also an all-day thing, so consider that. And then last but not least, January of 2025, bringing a small group of people out to Kenya for safari and photography. So yay. I think I can stop sharing my screen now, if I can figure out how to do that. Stop share. So that said, let me give you guys a little context of what we're doing here this evening. For those of you that has joined us in our last set of webinars, again, this is our 5th one. The first few that we did we were just doing a lot of questions and answers, and people were submitting questions and submitting images, and we would have back and forth on how to develop stuff, and I was giving my take, and it was a big sort of open office hours presentation. And then I started bringing some guests in, and last week, for example, excuse me, I should say last month, we had Eric Joseph from Freestyle Photographic in Los Angeles, and Eric is a guru on printing, digital printing. I love talking with Eric. Every time him and I get together, we go on for hours and hours and hours and just nerd out on all the stuff around how to print digitally. So he came by and we had a 2-hour conversation on digital printing. And the video for the last two, we did not record the first three. Again, they're just open office hours, but the last two we did record, and those are available on my website, and we'll send you links to those tomorrow, in addition to a link to this video, to this presentation we're doing tonight. But this is going to be a bit different. Unlike what we did with Eric, which was a 2-hour, very technical conversation about printing, I wanted to talk about Lightroom and workflow from a very different side of the spectrum here. And I thought David duChemin, my friend for many years now, would be a perfect person to come in and do such a thing. And that other perspective, it'd be not to talk so much about the ins and outs or the nerdy sides of the develop module and raw file workflow and how to play with this slider versus that slider. But to make images work and be successful, to have them look good, there's something very important that needs to happen, and I think needs to happen before any of those tools are played with, and that is to have kind of an idea of what you want to do, where you want to go, what your image is about, and what you want to say about it. If you don't have those things, that thing in your head, well, I think developing images is hard to do. And having an idea can give you direction for what you want to do. So let me give a quick example before I introduce our guest here, and that is, in all the workshops and years I've taught here, I inevitably get a photographer, one, maybe two, that will come up to a scene that we put in front of them. They'll get to the scene, they'll plop their tripod in place, firmly put it in front of them, have their camera all set up, get their lens on there, set their shutter speed, set their aperture, and then look at me and say, what do I do? How long, what do I do? What should I print this at? Or before they even put those settings in, what should I set my shutter speed and aperture to? And when I see those kinds of people, when I see students doing that, which I refer to often as gear flexors, I'll stop them and I say, before you're doing what you're doing, I want you to take a minute and put your camera away. I want you to look around first. I want you to take in the scene in front of you. Notice the patterns if we're doing seascapes here in Monterey. Notice the patterns of the rocks around the waters. Notice the lighting. Notice this, notice that. Come back to me in 10 minutes and tell me what you see. Let's talk about it. Because if you don't have an idea of what you're photographing and why you're photographing it, then how do you know how to set your shutter speed and understand if what you're doing is trying to create movement with the water or stop the motion of the water, or what is the narrative? And when you have that in mind, then you'll be able to determine what your setting should be. You'll be able to it'll help you determine what should and should not be in your frame. If things are in your frame that are not supportive of what you're trying to say, they shouldn't be in there. But the thing is that idea is really crucial to the developmental side of things as well. So my guest is going to talk to us about his workflow and what he thinks about as he approaches his development. And with that said, David.
Yo.
Hey,
can you hear me?
How are you?
Huh, I'm living the dream. Living the dream.
Thanks for being here tonight, David. I've known David for years now. And this is kind of our first time like actually doing something together in the realm of photography, other than, you know, just shooting together and having a whiskey together and having fun together. So for me, this is exciting, and thanks for coming and doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. So let me, first of all, this is a conversation, and I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then Jason will, at any point in time, jump in. My wife has made me an old fashioned. Jason's got a glass of whiskey. This is not a formal thing. This is, in fact, this is closer to an evening at a jazz club with a couple friends that are just there to screw around. Many of you know me, and I know many of you. Of course, Jason's audience is here as well. And one of the things we've hoped for is sort of cross-pollination, because Jason has said some very nice things about me. So let me return the favor. Jason is the guy that I send once I have done my level best to make a photograph feel the way I want it to feel. I will send my raw files to Jason and say, do what you need to translate my vision to print, because I am not a printer. And printing is a craft all its own. It's a craft that I have decided I don't want to learn. So God bless you if you do, but that's not what I want to do. Jason is very good at that. And he's got the chops technically, but he's also got the chops creatively. And that's one of the reasons that he and I jive so well together. So some of this comes out of my thinking. I have a framework that I use when I develop, that I long ago called the vision-driven workflow, because for many years I was the guy that talked about vision. Now I've changed that a little bit. Now I more talk about intent and mindfulness, because I think the metaphor of vision, it can be confusing, especially when we're talking about a visual thing like photography. So I talk about intent. And Jason and I were having a whiskey the other day, and we were sort of, shooting the stuff and just talking about things. And we just got on this rant about intent and about mindfulness and about the fact that so many students will, and this is not a knock, by the way. I think this is a natural progression of the way we learn, but they will ask, what should I do here? What should I do with, which slider should I use? And I think that we do a disservice to you who are trying to learn when the first thing we say is, well, just nudge the exposure slider and nudge the highlight slider back. And rather than taking a bird's eye view and saying, first, what do you want to accomplish here? Like, what do you want? There's that old saying that says, don't shoot what it looks like, shoot what it feels like. And I think the same thing is true when you develop a photograph. What do you want it to feel like? What's the story in the case of an image that has a story? Where do you want my eye to go? Where do you want my mind to go? What do you want me to think? What do you want me to feel? Those are the first questions. And so I haven't got a slide for this. You will get a recording, so you can write it down later if you want. But here, I'm going to tell you the 4 steps of my vision-driven workflow. And then I'm going to give you a bit of a detour, and then I'm going to show you a few photographs to illustrate some of this stuff.
Hey, David.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt your flow real quick. There's just one thing I wanted to say to everybody, just I forgot to say at the beginning. It's kind of important. And that is that at the bottom of your screen, everybody, there is, I think it's at the bottom of your screen, there is a section for Q&A. So as David's talking here and talking about his workflow, if there's any questions that you have, feel free to add those, type those in. We have my co-host behind the scenes, Evie Benjamin, is going to be fielding those and sifting through them. And at the end of this session here, we'll open up the floor for 20 or 30 minutes or so to answer any of those questions that you may have. So this is going to be a bit interactive as we go here. So sorry about that, David. Please continue.
Yeah, no problem. So you might want to write this down, or you can just wait for the recording and write it down later. But it's 4 steps, and I find frameworks very helpful, rather than getting to your computer and opening up an image and just going, well, now what? I guess I just move shit around until it looks good. But what does good look like? I mean, I have no idea what would look good to you. It may look good, but it may not at all be what you intended. So here's my vision-driven workflow, and it begins with step number 1 is identify your intent. Just like Jason said, you're sitting in the bay at Monterey, you stick your tripod down, you ask Jason what to do, and Jason says, I don't know what you should do. Go figure, like sit and feel the scene. Look at what appeals to you. What appeals to you will not be what appeals to me. And you need to, before, it's kind of like, you know, our camera's kind of like a microphone. And some people get into photography because they just really like microphones. And they're just, you know, they love they got the newest one, they got the greatest one, but they have nothing to say. The thing, by the way, I the more of this old fashioned I drink, the more opinionated I will get. I am very passionate about this stuff. I recognize that my way is not the only way. It's probably the right way, but no, I'm kidding. I am very passionate about this stuff, and I think that if you don't have anything to say, if you're saying like just broadly, wow, look at all of this, that's not specific enough. You are the one that's responsible to point me toward a certain mood, point me toward a certain feeling, or whatever it is that you're pointing at. Maybe it's a contrast between elements. Maybe it is a texture or a shape or a play of colors. But you got to have a subject. You got to have something when you say, look at this. And then when you're in the darkroom, you're refining that. You've already made the photograph. Now you're saying, okay, how can I really make this, whatever it is, how can I really make it pop? If it's a play of colors, do I saturate one and desaturate another so that one is dominant and they play well together? Do I shift it slightly in terms of the hue so that the color contrasts are stronger? A color wheel is a great tool for stuff like that. Do you change the luminance of things so that some areas are lighter and some areas are darker? Very few photographers learn about hue, saturation, and luminance. And these are tools. I don't mean the hue, saturation, the HSL tools in Lightroom. Those can move and change the values of hue, saturation, and luminance, but exposure can change luminance values, and so can highlights and whites and shadows, and so can the tone curve. There are so many different, we think of them as our tools, but the tools are actually the more fundamental things like color and contrast and luminance, hue, saturation, all that stuff. So the first step is identify your intent. Sit down for a minute, hold your horses. You've got plenty of time to polish the turd. Before you start, sit down and go, what do I want this to feel like? What do I want the viewer to look at? What do I not want them to look at? What's important? What's not important? And then you can begin your work. But until you sit down, now I'm going to do my little detour here, and that is that you won't always know. Sometimes there will be an intermediate step where you just explore, where you just screw around for a while. But I would argue that's the stage at which you are learning to identify your intent. That's the stage you're learning to use your tools. That is not the way that we express our voice. Your voice will be entirely schizophrenic if every time you sit down at a computer, all you do is aim for something that looks different, something that looks like the last Lightroom preset that you saw. So relax, take a breath, and figure out what you want this to look like. Maybe it's just one word. Maybe it's moody, maybe it's mysterious, maybe it's bright and cheerful. Maybe you know that you want it to feel kind of romantic and warm, and you want this one, and I'll give you an example in a minute, but you want the eye to go to a specific spot in the frame. If you can, and you're that kind of person, that kind of learner, write it down, because that's what's going to give you your marching orders, so that later when you look at the image and you're feeling very self-satisfied that your turd is very well polished, you can look at this list and go, did I accomplish it? It may look different than that raw image, but is it really what you wanted to accomplish? Only you can answer that. So identify your intent is the first thing. And I think the more time you spend with that before you rush to the sliders, the more satisfied you will be with the final result, and the more you will have a sense of where you go. Which sliders are you going to use? Do you need to play with saturation? Do you need to play with hue, luminance in various areas? Are there ways that you're going to, direct my attention, change the mood? So the second step, and I'm not going to talk at all about this, but the second step in my vision-driven workflow is minimizing distractions. That's when, for me, I can't work with a messy canvas. So that's when I'm going to take my first crack at straightening my horizons, toning things down that otherwise, like highlights and stuff like that. That's where I'm going to remove spots. That's where I might, and I'm very picky about my crops, but I might kind of tweak a crop just to feel like the balance or the tension is a little bit stronger. That's the second step, minimize distractions. It usually doesn't take too long. The third and the fourth steps are where I put my time and energy and where I really enjoy darkroom work. And I do not nerd out like Jason, and I don't say that disparagingly. He knows far more about this than I will ever know. But I know what I want it to feel like, because I've done that first step of identifying my intent. So think that, really don't dismiss this idea. That's where the creativity starts. But then you have this incredible opportunity to, okay, so here's the third step: maximize your mood. And the fourth step is draw the eye. So identify your intent, minimize distractions, maximize the mood, and draw the eye. And so I'm going to show you a few images here. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to kind of walk my way through a couple of photographs here with you. Lightroom. Okay. So what I've got going on here is I've got 3 or 4 images that I want to show you. So this is a raw file from Monument Valley. And in sitting down, and identifying my intent, what I'm asking is, why did I pick the camera up in the first place? And for me, this shot, it was all about texture, specifically the texture that kind of echoed. You've got this they call it the mitten. So the mountain and rock formation in the background looks like a mitten. But I came across this tree, and I thought it kind of echoed that, and there was an interesting juxtaposition. I also really like the color contrast. Orange and cyan is a very interesting color contrast to us. They exist opposite on the color wheel. And so I sat down, I kind of figured out, okay, what's important to me? And I loved this stuff going on at the bottom, but I couldn't really see it. And so the second step, this one, whoops, hang on. My arrow button's not working. This is the final image. Will it work? Yeah, there we go. So this is the raw file. This is the final image. But that's not the only iteration. It's the iteration that I came up with because I knew what I wanted. I adjusted the cyan in the sky to be a little bit more cyan. I desaturated the sky a little bit, because when you have 2 very saturated things, they don't play well together. You have to make a choice and make one dominant. So I chose to allow the background mitten to be a little bit more dominant. But I shifted the sky to be a little bit more cyan, so it was it just played nicer. You might choose, in maximizing the mood, to change your color temperature. You might choose to play with luminance, so to make the image lighter or darker. Here's an example of a different interpretation of this file that I think is more, it's on the other side. It's a totally different choice, but it is maximizing the mood. I've plunged those shadows, and I've made it much more, mysterious, because you're not showing all of that detail. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to show you the masking that I did on this, because one of the things I think that we are often missing is the opportunity, and this is the second, third, fourth step, which is draw the eye. So once I've played with maybe color temperature, and this is kind of global stuff. So basically, do the global stuff is maximize the mood, so color temperature and exposure and the overall vibrance and saturation. They will make an image feel different, right? So maximizing the mood. They're choices that will make the image feel different. But one of the things that I love, and it will do in almost every image, is a version of dodging and burning. So in this case, I'm using the masking tool, and I'm going to show you just kind of what I did here. This is a gradient. Actually, it's a brush, but I could have used a gradient. This was processed years ago, by the way. So I'm toggling it on and off, and you should see that foreground brighten a little bit. I also, increased the exposure and that sort of thing on the image, but this change is increasing. It's drawing my eye a little bit more to, because that mitten in the back is so visually massive, it so pulls your eye. I want you to go back and forth. The other example I showed you, you don't go back and forth. Like this is, if because there's no detail in it, you just go past the scraggly brush straight to the mitten, and you kind of stay there. You don't come back. And I like images with depth. I like that visual exploration and the bounce between foreground and background. And so I created that one mask, just generally brightening things, and then a second mask with a brush. And you see it's very different. This mask, I'll mouse over it, it's kind of just popping various parts. So there's kind of just a visual flow. And I can't explain that to you. I look at the image, I paint with the brush, I unpaint with the brush. But what I'm trying to accomplish is drawing your eye to various parts of the frame so that you don't just look at the brush, look at the mitten in the background and go, oh, that was nice, and move on. I want you to explore it. I want you to discover it. So that's my mittens shot. Let's look at something a little bit more, I don't know, with people, a travel shot. This is from India. And those of you that know me, you probably know this image in black and white, but I think it's an interesting photograph in color. And so here's,
well, David, let me interrupt you again, if I may here. Sorry to mess with your flow, but since this is conversational, before you move on from landscapes, I'm just curious how you personally, do you try and, as you're playing with color, are you trying to do a literal interpretation, or is it something more interpretive? Are you going by memory? Are you going by feel and mood, or all of the above? Or what do you kind of do?
Yeah, it's never literal. I completely reject the idea of accuracy with this stuff. It's entirely touch and feel. So for this image, I mean, obviously I have my raw file as a reference, but I know what I want it to feel like. As I grow as a photographer, I have a growing sensitivity to color and how it works together. And so I'm using those kind of as and when I say identify intent, I don't mean like you know exactly what it's going to look like. I mean, you have an idea, you have a feeling that you're trying to accomplish, you sort of have a sense, and then you kind of go by taste, right? Like when you're cooking and you put something in, well, it's not enough, I need a little bit more of this, or well, that's too much of that, maybe I need more of this. That's my process. But in terms of color, no. I mean, I calibrate my monitor, and that's about as far as I go. And then it's all color theory, in the sense that I know that I don't want this sky, for example, to be more of the violet side, because violet and orange don't play as well together. They're not as strong a color contrast. The harmony isn't there the way that cyan and orange is.
So that's kind of the answer I expected, but I definitely wanted to ask it as you were about to go into a portrait, as you're putting it. But with a portrait, you got to take skin tones into consideration. And are you then shifting to be a little bit more literal when you're doing portraiture, or something that's true to a skin tone, or is it still you're still in this interpretive feeling mode?
Always for me, always interpretive. Now, having said that, I don't have wedding clients. I don't have anyone that's going to look at a portrait and go, like if I shoot someone underneath if I experience a scene and there's a person underneath a blue tarp or an orange tarp, and the color's coming in and it's very garish, it's a greater chance that I just won't make the photograph than make the photograph and then screw around for long enough to make it look, or I will see it, and because there's that interesting color, I will photograph it because of that, or I'll just make it black and white. I just don't do color correction, because I kind of like color either the way I experience it or remember it, which probably the same thing, or I make it black and white. Like a lot of my travel stuff is black and white, but I do not do color correction the way that is traditionally thought, because I don't do fashion, I don't do weddings, and I'm okay with skin tone being orange because someone's staring at the setting sun. I'm just so, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
It does, and
it,
I love that, and I do the same thing. For me, it's all very interpretive based on how I'm feeling about a thing, and I don't care about literal this and literal that and accuracy, unless I have a client that's asking for it.
of
But
course. I
I'm,
think it's
you know,
it's really important to understand that there is no one way to do photography. There is no one way to make a photograph. There's no one way to process your images. And the question that begs asking is, what do you want? Like people say to me all the time, well, can I put in a sky if I don't like the sky that's there? I'm like, you can do anything you like. That's not my way. Because that's not why I make photographs. I do not substitute skies. Knock yourself out. It's not why I do it.
yeah.
But it doesn't make it wrong any more than this interpretation of the image, which I do not like. I only created it for this presentation. It doesn't, but someone might look at it and go, oh my God, that's way better. Okay, fair. You like this one better. It's not what I want to do, but that's
I
one of
think,
the beauties
and
of all of them.
I think that's such an important point you made that I kind of want to echo because of it. Because at the end of the day, um, for all of those listening, I mean, what David says and what I say and what other photographers say that we listen to, these are just what we like. But when you're going and you're playing with these tools and you're playing with Lightroom and color and literal versus interpretive and all this stuff, just do what makes you happy. Do what you like. Have it be joyful for you. Because if you're spending your time comparing your work to, oh, is this looking like a Bradley or a duChemin or whomever, and it's not quite lining up, then you're going to be left disappointed. Do what makes you happy, and that's what this should be about, as far as I'm concerned. You'll find your technique over time.
Yeah, I strongly believe that voice as a photographer has its foundation in personal preference and taste. If you don't start with what you like, I don't know what you're making your choices on. So I will fuss around with an image, and of course, if the skin tones are garish and in a way that I don't like, I will do my best to fix them or just make it a black and white image. Many of you that know me have seen this image in black and white. This is just one interpretation of it, but at no point in my conscious decision making was I looking at this and going, boy, I really got to get this guy's skin tones right. They didn't bother me. At no point did I go, whoa, something's wrong with that. And if it didn't bother me, I'm good with it because I was looking at other things. So here's the let me figure this out. Okay, so here's the original raw file. And I'll go toggle back and forth a couple times. Here is the eventual image. And I was going for India for me. If I'm not going black and white, India's color all the way and saturated and interesting and chaotic. Because it's chaotic, the colors don't always have to work together. So, you've got some reds and magentas with some greens and some blues. The colors work together here, but I didn't make a conscious choice the way I did with the previous image. But one of the things I did was try very hard to guide the eye through this rickshaw. I chose this rickshaw intentionally to shoot through all those great lines. And so I didn't want to darken it. I didn't want to sort of, in terms of drawing the eye, which is really what I'm focusing on here. I wanted to pull the eye to some very specific places. So this mask, here, let me turn this off. So this is the original sort of unaffected. This is brighter. I used a gradient filter and brightened the top there because I really like that bright red color. You'll see down here on the milk can, I've darkened that, and I just used a radial filter with a very heavy brush, and I kind of pulled back the exposure and probably the shadows. And if there were, let me see, I probably pulled back the whites or the highlights as well. I very much go by taste. I just kind of move. I know what I'm trying to do, and I'll just move sliders and go, nope. Oh yeah, that works. Let me turn. Yeah. Okay. So then I wanted to brighten up this side. I felt it was kind of getting lost because it's an interesting detail. I love the color combination. I just think it's beautiful. So the question is, how can I draw your eye? I want your eye to move around the frame, and I want it to get into the frame as well. And so I also brightened this couple in the back, this gentleman, and then the people behind him, with just a radial filter with probably just some exposure, so that you're not, because you cannot do everything with a global adjustment. You cannot go into an image and just go, oh, it's a little dark, I'll brighten it. Well, some of it needs to be dark. Brighten the things that need to be brightened. Leave the things that don't need to be brightened in shadow if need be. Just pulling it out, you're going to end up pulling the exposure on everything. You're going to end up with just these horrific looking images with no shadows, they're all going to be the same. Dodging and burning is where it's at. And where we have the advantage as digital artists is that we don't just, in the darkroom days, basically it was luminance. You were brightening and darkening. That was dodging and burning. Now we can dodge and burn. That is pulling the eye or pushing the eye with brightness, luminance. We can make it lighter or darker. We are drawn, generally speaking, to lighter things more than we are to dark. So one is a pull and one is a push. But it's also we can do it with hue and with saturation. Pull the saturation down in an area that you don't want the eye to be led to. Pop it in an area that you want the eye to go to. But it can also be clarity and texture. And there's so many ways, color temperature. There's so many ways that you can and all of those in combination. There's so many ways. And I know that someone out there, probably many of you out there listening going, okay, yeah, but give us, show us which. No, you've got to learn that by playing with it. The thing you have to learn is that the eye goes to certain areas over other areas. Certain changes in your image will feel different. And for you to develop that palette, just like if you're a chef, you got to eat a lot of food, not just study a lot of recipes. That might be helpful, but you have to eat the food and know what you like. And so for those of you that are listening, you need to learn what you like. Play with some photographs. You can't wreck a photograph in Lightroom. So polish it to the ends of the earth. Make 1 million virtual copies if you need to, and figure out, oh, okay, if I mask this, and we have got incredible masking tools now, like nothing before. We can select a subject in a way that we could never do before. The sky, the background, we can select objects and people. We can do it with a brush, a linear gradient, radial gradient. There are so many tools that we can use in Lightroom. I don't go out of Lightroom ever, almost ever. Because I have all the tools I need, and they're so easy to use. They work, it's kind of like, 90% of the time they work every time. They're getting really good. There's no reason why you should not be doing the global adjustments and getting it to that point where you're like, oh yeah, okay, it's starting to feel right. And then really guide my eye. Don't be heavy-handed. Nuance is important to learn, but I think you are missing out if you have not played with and become comfortable with the masking tools. They are so good now. I mean, they used to be okay, but now they're just, and you can bake them into presets. Like, I mean, it's phenomenal. So
I'm gonna jump in and say, can I get an amen from everybody out there in the audience? Because what you're saying right now is exactly why I thought you would be perfect person to come in and have this discussion. Because at the end of the day, I can, with these Lightroom live sessions or when I teach developing, I can go on and on about this slider and that slider. And when you come in here, just use it this much or that much, and have a very nerdy formulaic approach to how to do all this stuff. But I'm like you, so I love you, man. I'm a firm believer that and that's why nobody could see it, but I got a big smile on my face when you just said a second ago, I could tell you how to do it, and your answer was no, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, because I want you to go out and play. I'm a firm believer in that the power of the creative process is to be inspired, to be playful. And I think people should do that in the field with their cameras. And I absolutely 1000% believe that they should have that approach with the develop module and with their images in Lightroom as well. And it starts from what you're talking about, have some sort of idea as to where you want to go. But when I'm approaching my stuff, exactly, it sounds like what you're doing, David, with your stuff is just get a feel for, I want to direct an eye here, or I want to play with color in this way, and kind of go for this mood and this feeling. And the mood and the feeling is what's kind of driving your process. And then from there, it's so not formulaic. It's actually, let's talk about color here. It's play with the tint slider and the temperature slider. And if that's not working, then start using finer tools like your HSL panel. And if that's not working, then start to get with your AI tools and play with colors in specific areas. But the point is that if you go in with an idea of what you want to do and where you want to go, just play with everything and figure out how to get there. And in that playful process, guess what's going to happen? You're going to discover new things. Oh, I didn't know this tool could do that, or I didn't know I could do this with that. And then you'll get better and better and better at your technique, to where over time, as your ideas begin to drive you, you'll start to intuitively go, say to yourself, I want to do this to an image, and you'll know where to go first, or you'll get better and better and better. But it's still, even like with somebody like me, as it is what it sounds like with David, and I've been teaching workflow for years and years and years. I've written a book on Lightroom. People, professionals and amateurs, come to me with help on this all the time. I don't suggest to do anything other than play. And it's what I do with all of my images. I get an idea and I play with the tools until I get there, until I get to the idea that I had. That's it. Love
100%. And you know what? There are color photographers out there who know all of these tools. They know all of this. They know way more than I will ever know about, but they don't understand color. If you want to put your energy into something, if you are a color photographer, you need to understand color. You need to understand how color works. You need to hone a sensitivity to color. You can't just crank your well, I mean, you can just crank your saturation slider up globally, but that's not how color works.
And you should and I want to say that too. And you should take that freaking slider and you should crank it just to see what it does. And chances are it's going to look like crap, but what if it didn't? And what if you went the other way with vibrance and just go crazy? And that's what I was saying a second ago, is you'll start to discover all this stuff, and you might find that after some time, you're starting to develop your images in ways that you weren't even thinking about before, just because you have all of these new ideas about techniques that you figured out just by futzing with sliders in ways that you didn't even consider before.
Absolutely. But on top of that, I mean, the point I was trying to make is simply that on top of all of that playfulness, if you're going to geek out on this stuff, if you are a color photographer, you need to study color. You need to understand how they work. If you don't know what a complementary color schema is, if you don't know what an analogous color schema is, if you don't understand how color works on an emotional level, that's the stuff you need to study, because it will open up incredible horizons to you. If you're a color photographer, I beg you to start exploring color. And I didn't go to school for this stuff. A photograph is beautiful because you look at it and it's all there. There's no secrets. You can learn this stuff without going to art school, without reading a bunch of books, especially these days with YouTube. And there are some great resources. I make some of them, but the reality is you can learn this stuff the way I did, which is you figure it out. Let me show you another photograph. Here's a picture of a grizzly bear that I'm particularly fond of. And there's only so much our technology can do, right? You can capture the highlights, you can capture the detail in the shadows, but at some point you're making compromises. And so I try to make the best possible digital negative. I try not to lose too many details. I try to keep my ISO as low as possible when possible. I mean, it's only ISO 500 here, so that's not so bad. But I knew that I was going to take this because this scene looked different in person. It felt different in person. And so this is what it felt and looked like, right? My eyes can look at a scene like this and look into the shadows and not worry. I don't see the burned out highlights and that sort of thing. So I know there's a difference between these two images. I know that I want it warmer. I know that I want to see the bear more clearly. This is my first step. Identify your intent. What do you want out of this image? What needs to happen? And so I warmed it up. I brightened it up, but I don't want to brighten up globally. I mean, a little bit, right? You can see I've gained some shadow and some detail in the shadow. But what I really want is to focus on this bear and this fish. And I rather uncharitably called this bear Spaz, because he was young, he was a cub of the year, he was trying to figure out how to be a bear, and it was not working for him. And it kept falling over, and so I wanted that sense of playfulness. I wanted some color in the image. And so I developed it in a warm, rather nostalgic kind of way, brightened it up a little bit, played with the hue, the saturation, the luminance. But for me, the real difference is in the masking. So I'll turn these on and off. So this is the fish. You can see the head of the fish and the claws of the bear. I just painted a brush on there. And I can actually show you exactly what I did here. So if I make that mask visible, what did I do? Got to select it. There we go. I nudged the exposure a little bit. I tweaked the saturation a little bit. I pushed the whites up a little bit. It's not big. These are not like, I'm not going to write an ebook or a course about making tiny little changes, but they do pull the eye. They draw your eye and your attention. This mask was simply to tone down the highlights. I just painted a brush and pulled back what did I do here? I pulled back the highlights and the whites a little bit. And you end up with something that's much less hot, because that hotness, that bright whiteness with no detail, it pulls your eye to that side. And that's not what I want. This is a mask with a radial gradient, and it's just brightening the face of the bear. So just a push of exposure to 0.41 just brightens the face, because I want to be able to see the hair, the fur, the fur. I want to be able to see the eye. I don't want to make it super natural. A lot of people, especially early on as they're shooting models, you see a picture on Instagram, you're like, whoa, like what happened to the eyes? I'm like, whoa. I'm still looking for subtle. I'm still looking for it to feel natural. So don't bash me on the head with a hammer with this stuff. And then the last change that I made was simply a radial filter over the foot of the bear. And in this case, kind of pulling down, wait, is that right? Yeah, pulling down some highlights and pushing the whites so that the detail, I don't need to bring detail in shadows, but I really wanted a little more contrast, and I wanted to define the area of that foot so you could really see it. That's drawing the eye. You might choose to draw the eye in other ways. You could let's add another mask, and let's go select background and drawing the eye. So there's pushing and pulling. You could choose, if you felt like, that background is really massive visually, I want to pull it back. So you select it and pull the exposure back, or you don't want maybe all of that. So shadows, maybe you could do a little bit of highlights. Remember, it's this particular one has chosen the water as the background as well. So the change you make there might not be what you want, but just keeping in mind the framework. If you can just remember those 4 ideas: identify intent, minimize distractions, maximize the mood. And again, that could be things like color temperature and the luminance of the scene, the saturation, how it feels globally, and then zero in on, okay, I've got it globally feeling kind of right. How do I get the flow of the eye moving from here to here, to the important things and away from, you might decide that, you don't like that stuff in the background, that it's just too much. And that's minimizing distractions, but it's also drawing the eye. Do it at whatever point you feel you need to. I'm going to show you one more, and then Jason, we're gonna jump in to Jason's sort of our conversation and some Q&A and that sort of thing. This was done in Samburu in northern Kenya, and it's just a picture of a giraffe. The raw file is rather unremarkable, but I remember it so differently. I mean, so differently. And I have very romantic feelings about giraffes and Africa. This place was hot. Northern Kenya, I've spent a lot of time there. It is hot. And so it was suitable, it was fitting that my interpretation of this scene, again, when you go from a raw file to my final interpretation, it's like, whoa, did you ever overwork that? But if this is the first image you see, and then you go backwards, it's like, wow, that's just, there's nothing there. There's no life, there's no pop. And so very much I warmed this up. But there's a lot of masking going on. So this mask, let me pull my thing out here. This mask is a very, if I got it hidden, yeah. So if I zoom way out, look how big this mask is. I've drawn it like way off the frame. It's so heavily feathered, but I've pulled the contrast up. I've dropped the highlights entirely. In this one, I've bumped the exposure and I've cooled it a little bit because the rest of the image I want to be a warmer image, and you can't just have everything super warm. This is the bottom going up. So you can see the feather on that, but you can see the mask going. There we go. So you see the mask going up, and there I've pulled back the exposure. So this kind of amplifies the idea of backlight. Light coming from above that's a little brighter is always going to be the reciprocation of that is darker shadows where the light is not falling. So lighter from on top, shadows from on the bottom. It gives the image a little bit more depth, and it recreates a little bit of that feeling of backlight. This is very much the same. It's way like the gradient filter is drawn from way up here, which is a trick a lot of people don't know. If you're not satisfied with just drawing that filter within the image, zoom out and draw from like way back here, and you can get a much more heavily feathered dropping off kind of look, which light tends to do that. Light is not like boop, tiny little gradients. But here I've upped the exposure because again, the light's coming from up, but I've like warmed it way up. Like my temperature is at 100, and then on again the bottom, I've drawn a really soft gradient, and I've pulled the exposure back, and it just creates a little bit more depth than on the original image. This is simply a radial filter in which I've pushed the highlights a little, the whites. I don't need to push the patches of the giraffe. I just need to increase the contrast a little to really pull your eye to it. And have I done anything else? Sometimes I will. Yeah. So here, texture and clarity I've added as well to my dodging and burning, because this is all about fur, and hair is all about texture. And sometimes clarity kind of helps things pop a little. Since Lightroom developed the texture slider, because I used to call the clarity slider my texture slider, and then Adobe went ahead and invented one called texture. So I use that more now. And then this one is just really, if I zoom in here, this one's just like, see how I've brushed around the eye. And this, by the way, is before I denoise things. Actually, it's before I send it to Jason to denoise my images. But if I turn this off. Let me turn the mask off here. See how it just pops? It just pulls your eye just a little bit. And so on images where the catch light isn't as strong as I would like, or the definition of the eye isn't as strong as I would like, you use this on things other than eyes. But again, this is step 4. This is drawing the eye. This is, in this case, actually literal, but you're pulling my eye to the elements you want to pull it to. And this is old school dodging and burning with a twist, because we can do it with all the luminance tools. We can do it with the color temperature. We can do it with saturation. We can do it with clarity and texture. And it's almost like we've just been given this incredible toolbox. And I would encourage you to use the full gamut of that toolbox. If this workflow is helpful to you, if this framework is helpful to you, I encourage you to use it. I still, years after I wrote Vision and Voice, I still use this framework. It's what guides me. It keeps me on track. It keeps me from doing like a million iterations and never knowing when I'm done, because I always circle back to, does this match the intent that I've identified? And then there's going to be, your development work will always reveal some more distractions. So you're going to tweak those. Maybe some highlights have kind of gone out of range. You can pull those back. Maybe you've seen some more sensor spots in the sky now that you've adjusted things. So you're going to kind of go through it maybe a couple of times and refine and refine. And I usually go back the next day, because I'll push these things, and the next day I go back and I'm like, whoa, was I ever heavy-handed? So going back and just kind of, you can always dial it back. You can always create a virtual copy and try again, do an alternate version. Maybe you're like on the fence. Is it this or is it that? Try them, play with them. But if it's total free for all, I don't think you're going to learn as well. And I don't think you're going to be able to express your voice as well, because personal preference, generally speaking, once you nail it down, it's not all over the map. It's like, I like these things and I'm not fond of these things. So stick to these things and avoid these things. Don't worry. Let someone else do these things. Jason, before I ramble any further, save me from myself.
You know, we said at the beginning this is going to be conversational. We said leading up to this is being conversational, but I'm just having such a good time listening to you that I'm just letting you just go, man.
I haven't even had much of my drink. Please
I know.
talk.
I'm on like my second one here, and so I'm you're way behind, sir. I love that. Everything you said. That's the other thing too. It's like I love everything you said so much. Why stop you? I'm in a 1,000% agreement with everything you're saying there. In fact, there's something I want to. Well, there's a point that I want to make here that's important, that echoes everything you're talking about here. But as I'm leading up to it, here's a question for you. Can you go back to that? Are you still sharing your screen? You are not.
I will.
Share your screen again.
Keep talking and it will magically appear.
Magic.
What do you want to see?
Go back to that bear image, if you can.
I can. We have the tools.
And then one of the things that you were doing with that bear image there is you were kind of highlighting what you can do to the background and not affect the subject there, using this amazing masking AI tools that we have. Here's my question. I mean, this stuff is getting easier and easier, and just it's like it just almost does it for us to some degree. These tools are getting so good, and the AI technology, we're really just at the beginning of what's possible with this stuff, and how I see the technology, the quality of this technology growing exponentially in the years ahead, where things are just going to be easier and easier. Do you feel like as you were playing with the background here and isolating the bear, that you're cheating?
I'd be cheating if there were rules, but I don't believe there are rules. You
don't feel guilty just a little bit, David?
Nope, I don't. Picasso has this idea that you got to learn the rules before you break them, and I'm like, yeah. I call bullshit on that. I know what he was trying. I think. Yeah. Well, who knows what Picasso was trying to say? But certainly learn the principles, learn good craft, learn what works before you break them, because I think there's just a gamut of possibility there before you narrow it down. But no, I don't believe in. I mean, you've read my book, A Beautiful Anarchy. I don't believe in rules. This is art. We're not, I mean, there are rules where driving on the road is concerned and being a good global citizen is concerned. But this is self-expression.
Yeah, but isn't what everybody's saying now, especially since we're talking about AI tech, is that all this stuff is doing it for us? And I mean, we're not seeing it in Lightroom, but other kinds of AI, isn't it just replacing what artists are doing?
Where do you, well, I mean, that's another conversation, but where do you draw the line with, like, I mean, anyone that used to shoot 8x10 or 4x5 field cameras and develop their own stuff in the back of a van and, dodge and burn traditionally, they're going to look at any of this stuff as cheating. And the only thing, I'll tell you what, the only thing that makes a difference to me, the only thing that matters, two things. Is this the way that I want to create? Does that feel good to me? Is that in line with who I am and what I believe about, integrity or creativity or whatever the reasons for which you create are? And what does the photograph look like? At the end of the day, that's all that matters to me. I'm not going to tell anyone else that they can or can't do things. I don't like substituting skies. I don't feel like AI is art per se. You can use AI tools, but the wholesale creation of an image where you tell Chat GPT, some large language model, to make me an image that looks photographic and looks like this, and this. I don't. I have yet to be convinced. But I don't think it matters. I don't want to be that old guy that's like, wow, get off my lawn. I know what I like. I know what I want to do. And, you know, I mean, others can do what they like. So no, I don't feel like I'm cheating. I feel like if it gets me to the point where the image is a faithful representation, again, these are my constraints, a faithful representation of how that moment felt to me without changing the integrity of it, I'm happy. So darkening the background using one tool or another so that I don't have to spend hours doing some goofy masking, and I bring it on.
What about the sweat equity factor and all this in terms of, uh, you know, the craft, the knowledge, the wisdom, I don't know, phrase it however you want, that it takes to get to the point where, well, you know what? Let me shut up for a second. I'm going to kind of go into an example that I was going to give here in the sense that I agree. I'm devil's advocating a little bit here, but I agree with you 1000%. In fact, I think the technology, um, it makes us faster. It makes us more productive. We don't have this sweat equity component of this in the sense that using a masking feature and hitting a tool allows me to quickly mask off a bear and do a background and do a change instantaneously, where before I would have to have a fair amount of knowledge on how to finesse something in such a way where I can play with the background and not play with the bear. Um, but the thing is this, is that at the end of the day, whether as this technology is growing and we feel like it's easier and easier and easier to do this stuff and anybody can do it sort of thing, is that underneath it all, we're not doing anything different than, well, let me show you my example. Let me share my screen now. Are you still sharing yours? You're not. So let me share my screen.
No, I turned it off. And let me underline that point. The reality is if masking a bear is your biggest creative challenge, you are not digging deep enough. The hard stuff is in that first step, identifying your intent. So I'm not going to steal your thunder, but I'm kind of stealing your thunder. I mean, I just looked at this screenshot. I'm like, that's the hard stuff. The tool that does it,
yeah,
not so much.
So you're not stealing anything, and we're just you're not stealing anything. But I want to show this image here because this is an image of, and maybe people recognize this, maybe people don't. Those of you that do, they can tell right away. This is one of Ansel Adams' most famous images, Moonrise Hernandez. But this is not what people normally think of when they think of Moonrise Hernandez, because what we're looking at here is an undeveloped, and I showed this image a couple Lightroom Live webinars. Actually, I'll say this: I showed this a couple Lightroom Live webinars ago that was focused on masking tools, as we're talking about now, because I was kind of illustrating this point. But anyway, this is an unusual take on Moonrise Hernandez because it's an undeveloped straight print or contact print from the negative that you took of Moonrise Hernandez. And I'll show you this next slide here. And this is something that's even a rarer view of Moonrise Hernandez, believe it or not. And what we're looking at here is a set of Ansel Adams printing notes about Moonrise Hernandez. And what printing notes are, for those of you that have never worked in a darkroom, is basically a recipe for a photographer to take a look at the raw materials. And I'm purposely using the word raw here, looking at the raw materials of what they have on their negative and making decisions, generating ideas of what they should do, having a vision for what a final print should look like, kind of doing a mental process along the lines of everything David's been talking about here that he does with his workflow using Lightroom and all of the modern tools that we have here today. It's just that we're doing it in an analog state, so you have to have analog tools or analog process to do it, and write this recipe out. And what we're looking at here is, this is how Ansel, for Moonrise Hernandez, after he looked at that negative, dodged and burned and redirected light or the attention of his audience to one part of the frame, and used contrast filters in another part of the frame. And this is what he did, where he was able to go from that crude straight print of the negative that we first saw to something like this, which was a final version. So when Ansel was doing this stuff, or when here's another one that I popped up here that's a famous one to look at. This is a famous portrait of James Dean in Times Square. And look at all of the scribbles and markings that this photographer, Dennis Stock, put on his raw materials before he made his final print. The question is the same. Is this photographer, is Dennis Stock or is Ansel Adams, when they were going from their raw materials and manipulating it to go from stage one to the final print, was that manipulation? Was that, we use the term photoshopping things a lot nowadays. I get asked the question, and it's kind of why I asked David is, I get asked the question a lot, did you Photoshop that? Did you change it? Did you play with the color or play with the contrast and do this? As if people are kind of wary that they're looking at something that's a bit inauthentic. But there's a difference in this day and age with creating something that's inauthentic versus creating an image that is done with a sense of creative expression. And I wouldn't begin to say for a second that looking at this image here that Ansel cheated. I look at this image here and I'd say what he did there is exactly the same kind of thing that David's talking about. He does with his process, and he has, as he's playing with color in the sky, it's interpretive. He has a feeling and a mood and an experience that he had when he was there, and that he remembers, and he's recreating that. And the decisions that he makes with choice of color and contrast and texture and detail are all based on that, and that directs his process. And so ultimately what my point is this, is that we're using all of these modern tools, and we're using AI this and AI that, and sometimes we're asking ourselves, am I creating something authentic when I'm doing this? But at the end of the day, I want everybody to feel in this playful sort of mode as they're getting in this tool, as they're playing with these tools, so they can not worry about so much whether or not they're Photoshop or something, or being authentic, but what they're doing instead is expressing themselves creatively. So you can feel free to play. You can feel free to do that stuff. Ansel wasn't cheating. He was expressing himself creatively. Dennis Stock wasn't cheating. He was expressing himself creatively. This kind of stuff that we're talking about here, I feel, is very different than if you're taking one of the things that David pointed out at the beginning of this, if you're taking an image and you're removing your sky and placing a different sky in there, or if you're removing stuff and adding stuff. That kind of gets into the realm of, digital creation than photography. But in terms of everything I'm hearing David talking about here, that's what we should feel free to play with, all of that stuff, and be interpretive as we go. So I love everything you're saying.
Thanks, bro. I only do this so that you can agree with me. No, consensus is not important in art. It's nice that we agree, but the reality is not everyone is going to, and everyone's going to do it their way, and there's room for that as well. I would just simply point out, when someone says to me, on the issue of, photoshopping, and Vincent Laforet says, Photoshop is not a verb, and I very strongly agree with that. Actually, it might have been Vincent Versace, I'm not sure. But either way, when someone says to me, yeah, but did it really look like that? I would remind you that the instrument of seeing is not our eyeballs, it's our mind. We perceive things, and we perceive with so many layers, more than just, our optic nerves. We perceive things with our there's a layer of memory there, and what's important to us, nostalgia, and all this stuff. It's a mind thing. And so, was I wearing my glasses because, if you ask me, did it really look like that? I don't know. I was wearing glasses at the time. It was all kind of fuzzy, otherwise. There's, where the color is exactly like, well, that's how they felt. And I think this is where I come to my sort of punctuation mark, is there is a great deal of freedom in approaching things this way, rather than the need to pursue a very old and I think outdated idea that, quote, the camera never lies, and therefore we should always be accurate. Is that what we achieve in storytelling? Is that the best we can do, is accuracy, rather than, hey, tell you what, don't trust the camera, trust me. Let me guide you into something interesting, something deeply human. That's much, to me, that's a much more worthy pursuit than accuracy. So, Jason, tell you what, we've got about 20 minutes to give to these folks. Do you want to start on some question and answer type stuff?
I do. I want you to take a second and let's do our business now, not at the very end, in terms of, do you have any websites, books, or courses that you want to direct people to?
Yeah, the only thing I want you to do is go to mycontactsheet.com if you are not already subscribing to my contact sheet. I send out an email every 2 weeks on average. And generally speaking, it's not a newsletter. I'm not telling you what I'm up to. It's a new article about the art and craft of photography from a creative perspective. And it's my best. It's what I've got. Sometimes I will, from there, direct you to a course or a resource or a book. But if either go to mycontactsheet.com and sign up for that, or just go to my website, davidduchemin.com, you will make your way there. That's where you'll find my work and links to my books and that sort of thing. So if you are not familiar with me or my work, I would welcome you with open arms. I have an international community of wonderful photographers whom I very much love, and you would be very welcome there.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. The only thing I'll say in business-wise, because I took care of a lot of it at the beginning here, is that Lightroom Classic Live, as we're doing here tonight, is happening the first Tuesday of every month. And we sometimes have guests, sometimes we have open office hours. Next month, I would like to, because we seem to be getting, according to Effie, my co-host here, who you haven't seen, but trust me, she's there, a lot of questions behind the scenes about organization. So we want to dedicate the next one to just that. We're going to have, I don't know exactly how we're going to do it, but we're not going to have any particular guests. So we're going to have an open office hours sort of form. Send us your questions ahead of time about organization, so we can get a feel for what kind of things it is you want me to cover. And I'll have something kind of prepared for you to walk you through my workflow in terms of how I'm importing things, how I categorize things. And there's all sorts of ways that we can categorize, as we can go from keywords to collections to colors to all sorts of stuff. And I'll go over as much as I can within an hour. Of course, we'll have a deeper dive in a workshop down the road in December, but that's what we're going to do for the next one. And then there will be some more guests in the months ahead in November and December. So again, first Tuesday of every month, check us out. You are welcome. This is free. So just join us. We'd love to see you. And with all that said, Effie, are you there? Can you hear me? Effie?
Hi, yes, thank you.
So this is my co-host I've mentioned several times, and even though you still can't see her, she's real. And Effie, are there any questions from our audience? Oh, we lost your audio. What happened?
There we go.
There we go.
We do have some. Thanks everybody for submitting. I've kind of combined like a few questions that are similar, so I'll just like rattle a few off here. Let's start at the beginning of our creative process. Are there things that you guys are thinking about before editing, and like when you're going through big batches of photos, say after a trip to like Katmai or Kenya, how do you pick the winners? Like, how do you decide which are the ones that are worth diving into?
David, you want to go first on that one?
Oh, do I ever? This is going to take another hour and a half.
There's more than one question
there. I do the same thing. I start with identifying my intent, and I work in bodies of work. So I am looking for Look, so many photographers go through and they're like, oh, is it this frame or is it this one? Is it this one or this one? This one, this one, this one, this one. Oh my God, I don't know. I'm like, if you get to an image and it is not a hell yes, it's not a hell yes. I don't delete any of my images, but it is not a pick. I go through and I'm just boop, 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 boop. Oh my God. If it makes me lean in, that's a pick. I go back to it later to make sure that it's technically viable. But and some of them will surprise me, but I'm working on a body of work. So I'm looking for rhythm. I'm looking for images that don't hit the same note twice. But I will go through every day I do my edits, because if you wait till the end, you may find a technical reason that you really should have been looking at your photographs to begin with, like your sensor needed cleaning or your lens isn't working or whatever. But I will go through and I will shoot thousands of photographs on a 1-month trip to Kenya. I will shoot 1,000 photographs a day, will come home with over 30,000 images, and I will out of that probably choose 24. So I'm not concerned about hit rates. I'm not concerned about all the, oh yeah, but if only I could rescue. No, it's a hell yes, or I move on. And that has freed me. I just go through bloop, bloop, bloop. I usually look in grid mode and thumbnails, because that helps me see balance and tension. And if it's an interesting composition, and I'll find the images and I'll, oh, that looks interesting. Is it? Nope. Nope. Oh yeah, that's the one. So I'm very emotional. Like I'm not the guy that looks at I don't look at every frame, but I will also do like 3 edits. I will do an initial one that day. I will do one later that week. I'll do one later that month. And I'll probably do one a year from now, because I will change in that year. I will be a different photographer with different skill sets, with different preferences. So I will look at them many times. But look, the goal is not to get as many images that kind of sort of make the cut. I'm not looking for mediocrity. I'm looking for the ones that make me go, oh yeah, it's a hell yes, or it's a no for me. And yeah, there might be some images in there that another editor might pick, but look, what good is it? What does it do me in terms of, like, if I look at it and it's not a hell yes, I don't care whether the rest of the world thinks it's great. If it doesn't satisfy me, I just leave it there. But again, I don't delete it, and I give it another chance later. And again, I do multiple edits.
24 out of thousands. Have you tried taking your lens cap off?
Oh, that's what it was.
There, that's what it is.
Ah. Lens caps.
I want to take a crack at this too, Effie. Ask that question one more time.
You forgot the question?
What are things that you think about before editing? Like when reviewing your photos, how do you sort of cull them down, and what are you thinking about when you decide which ones to like get into?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. There's so much I think about, and it's like a set by set sort of thing, meaning that here, and I agree with everything that David said. So let me just kind of throw one thing in there that I think kind of needs to be said, because I can't. Otherwise, I feel like I'm just reiterating what David said here, and that is that what I'm looking at initially is based on a set of ideas that I had at the time. And sometimes what I'm looking at on the computer aligns with that, and sometimes it doesn't. So one thing that I'm going to recommend everybody does, if they're not doing this already moving forward, is don't throw anything away. And I suggest not throwing anything away, because what I find with my archive, my body work moving forward, is that, again, as I'm first looking at the computer, I want to look for stuff that's aligned with what I was thinking about. But ideas change. My attitude changes. The technology that we're working with changes, meaning I might play with an image that I kind of like, and I find that after I'm working with in the develop module, even though I'm trying to move toward that idea that I had, it doesn't kind of line up the way I want it to, or the way I envision. So don't throw anything away, because everything changes. Our attitudes change, how I see images changes. I evolve as a photographer over time. How I see an image today is not how I'm going to see an image 5 years from now. And again, the technology changes as we are seeing with this AI stuff. So what I was not able to accomplish so easily a few years ago, if I go back into my archive and I kind of bring some of those images out, I might experience it in a totally different way because I'm not locked into that idea that I had when I was first shooting it, and I can see it from other angles and other possibilities. And certainly with the new tech, I can develop it with ways that I wouldn't do before. So so I'm going to say again, not because I don't want to. I can't add anything to what David brilliantly said, but I would say instead think in terms of, in addition to how you think of things when you first come back from Kenya or bears or whatever, is to be open to the possibility of revisiting that stuff down the road, because how you're going to see it a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now is going to be completely different than how you're seeing it at the moment. So be open to experiencing that as well.
Yep.
Any other questions,
Okay.
Effie?
Yeah, let's go with some. David.
I saw a couple in here, and I just need to clear this up. And this is a quick one, but maybe it'll give a little bit of rhythm to our conversation. A couple people have asked exactly what whiskeys we are drinking and which whiskeys we prefer, because I did say I was drinking an old fashioned. I'm just drinking straight up Jim Beam. It's not what I would drink. I'm not a bourbon guy, but Jim Beam for my old fashions, and that's because that's what Cynthia likes. And
that's very interesting, David, because if I'm making an old fashioned or a Manhattan, I tend to like rye whiskeys in my whiskey cocktails. So you like bourbons in your cocktails, and that's just what you had on hand?
It's what Cynthia makes, and what Cynthia makes is what David drinks.
I can't argue with that, especially.
I'm not a bourbon guy. I'm not. It's too sweet for me. I like a single malt whiskey, preferably from Scotland or Japan. Actually, I'm really into the Japanese stuff. But there you go. And what are you drinking, Jason?
Well, since you said it, here's a Oban 14, which is a Scotch. But I'm like you. I like Japanese things too. But right now, I'm having Oban 14.
There you go. There you go. Back to you, Effie.
Okay, let's ask some things in the workflow process. When do you guys sharpen? Like, when do you go into Topaz or Photoshop? Where in your process do you do that? We've had a few questions on that.
I'm going to jump into that one because it really depends on the software you're using. So there's lots of options nowadays. There's Topaz, there's DxO, there's On1. Adobe has its own stuff, and they work differently in the sense that if you're using Adobe's, it makes sense to obviously just do it in Lightroom, and it doesn't matter at what point of your developmental workflow you're doing it. You can do it at the beginning, you can do it at the end. Not the case, I would say, with Topaz, because when you're using Topaz, you are leaving your raw file workflow, you're leaving your raw converter, and you are processing that file, you're rasterizing that file, and after you run it through Topaz, you end up making a PSD or TIFF or however you set your preferences. So because of that workflow with Topaz, I would recommend to not do that until you've done everything else that you can in the raw converter, because when you're developing raw files, the idea, as they say, is to stick to that raw environment as long as you can for quality reasons. So don't do that till the end. And then, of course, there's DxO, and DxO has its own workflow. And with DxO, it makes more sense to do that work at the beginning of the workflow. Although DxO 3 works a little bit differently in DxO 2 and yada yada. So that seems to be changing and might change more moving forward with new iterations of their workflow. So it depends a little bit on the program that you're working. However, I want to point something out here about Adobe's denoising AI. If you haven't played with that yet, or if you haven't seen it yet, it's there. And if you look for it and you don't know what I'm talking about, and it's different than the regular old noise slider that you see in the details panel in Lightroom. There's that noise slider.
But then there's also something underneath it that's a denoise AI. And update it. Update your Lightroom if you haven't seen it yet, and use it and play with it. It works amazingly well. So much so that if you haven't invested in Topaz or DxO or on one of these other things, you might not need to, because I find it works really well. It does create another file for you that is labeled as enhanced. So it creates another raw file. So you'll have two files in your folder on your hard drive. But it's a raw file, so you're staying in that raw environment, which I should point out, because I didn't mention this before, you also do with DxO Pure Auteur 3. You can generate a raw file from it, but not with Topaz. But the Adobe's tech that they've just recently released, that works really well. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay, if you guys will allow, I'll ask a couple of more. David, you kind of mentioned that color photographers and people should study color. Do you have any resources or references that people should look into?
You know, I don't, only because that question finds me a little unprepared. I mean, I have a course called The Photographer's Voice that dives into some color stuff. But I would say go to YouTube, because there are a few resources there. And forgive me, there's a photographer named Juliana. Well, that's her name, Juliana. She has a last name, I can't recall it. She's very good. There are some YouTube videos. She has one that's about 50 minutes long that's excellent. And I'm sorry, I can't give you the name, but just go onto YouTube and look for color theory, color ideas, color harmonies for photographers, and see what you can find. One of the best things that you can do is just get a color wheel and become familiar with where colors exist in relation to each other. But actually, my Photographer's Voice course is pretty, if I don't say so myself, is pretty good. It's actually, it's about to be offered. If you're interested, send me an email, david@davidduchemin.com, and I will make sure you hear about it. Yeah.
Is it
Sorry,
Julianne
sorry, I
Cost?
can't be more. Sorry?
We've had some people submit. They said, is it Julianne Cost or Coast? Is that or Kunstler? No.
Julianne Cost is she's an Adobe evangelist.
Yeah, she's an
AOS.
Adobe evangelist. That's not the one I'm thinking of. It's someone else. And again, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. But anyway, there are things on YouTube. But there are lots of books. Like, go on Amazon and search for color and see what you can find. It's not going to be cheap to learn this stuff necessarily, but you owe it to yourself to understand how color works. There's one that I think is interesting called If It's Purple, Someone's Going to Die. And that's about using color in cinema and film and color psychology. I loved that book. I thought it was fantastic. But there are other books on color theory, and some are a little more academic than others. But I used to have no use for it, because I was like, what do I do with this? But the more I understood it, the more I kind of went, oh yeah, this is helpful stuff. But I've distilled a lot of that into my course called The Photographer's Voice. And if you email me fairly quickly, because it's going to launch soon, and I only open my courses for a little while, I can get you some more details. So david@davidduchemin.com.
Okay, and if I can ask one final one, I just wanted to end on this. Like, what do you guys do if you're feeling sort of stuck, where you're not sure where to go, or you're developing an image, but you just feel like you have too many options? What do you guys do when you feel stuck creatively?
Play. Just play. Just destroy. You cannot wreck the image. So just move everything, play. See, make 7 different virtual copies and develop them all differently, and shelve your expectations for a while and just play. Just ask, what if I do this? And because if nothing else, you will learn something. And at the end of it, you will either come back to a saner version of what you were doing, or you'll have a very clear idea of, oh, I really like this. Let's pursue it. It's creative. You're not looking for the right answer. You're looking for the one that feels like you. And so just play, and it may not be photographic. You may need to turn the computer off and go take a walk and throw a Frisbee and play with your kids, have Cynthia make you an old fashioned. These are my strategies. Jason?
Yeah, no, I agree. And to what does play mean other than to just futz with tools? I would recommend more concretely to do things that you wouldn't normally do. Drop in more than you normally would. Move, as we said before, a saturation slider all the way up, or invert the tone curve, or play with contrast like you wouldn't normally do. Do things that just seem ridiculous and see what that does to an image. Here's another idea. There's a part of the Lightroom Develop module that most photographers don't play with at all. They find it unhelpful. They find it doesn't do to their photos what they wanted to do. And that's the preset panel on the left-hand side, which I think is a really helpful tool for photographers that are in this either position where they're feeling stuck, or for photographers out there that, they have ideas, but they don't know where to go with them, or they don't have ideas at all. Either way, the preset panel, what that is again, it's on the left-hand side. It's a column on the left-hand side, and it comes equipped with a huge list of developmental presets that you can just hover over. And as you hover over each one of them, you'll see in the navigator panel above it a preview of that development that Adobe's supplying for you. So all kinds of different color versions, all kinds of different black and white versions, all those sorts of different developments that if you just start hovering over it and look at what Adobe's giving you, might spark some ideas of different kinds of styles. And one of the reasons why photographers don't like them is because it might take you in a direction, but there's always something wrong with it, or it messes up something in your image. Well, think of a preset as a starting point or a guideline. But if it's a starting point for you and you kind of hover over something and you think, oh, I kind of like, at least color-wise, where that's taking me, but it's blown out my highlight. Well, don't worry about that. Just then, after you click on it and select it, then go over to your sliders on the right, your exposure sliders or your contrast or your highlight or your white sliders, and then fix that highlight. But again, the preset is a good tool to use to kind of give you ideas if you're stuck, or again, if you don't know what's possible for you developmentally or stylistically, start hovering over it and playing with it.
Can I add something, Jason? I love that. I don't like presets because I think it encourages mindlessness, but I think they are great tools for exactly what you just said, and for learning. Go if you're sort of plateauing, and you go to a preset and look at it, look at the changes it makes to the image, and you'll have a better sense. You will learn how those tools can be used in ways that are divergent from your own practice. I think presets, generally speaking, they can encourage homogeny. We just suddenly we're just trying to make something look different rather than more aligned with our vision. But they can be incredible, as Jason said, they can be great tools to sort of stir the paint, and they can be incredible tools for learning because they give you a different starting point. And if you will then go into all the panels and look and go, oh, that's what that did, that'll give you a sense of how you can then ditch the preset and figure, now you've learned the technique, use that to grow your craft and to move forward.
And it's not only, presets is not the only place that I'd recommend that to. I get often asked, Nik software is a really popular software suite for stylizing images. I get asked all the time if I recommend them or I use them. And my answer is, personally, I do not, for the reason I kind of said before. And I like staying and encourage photographers to learn to stay within the raw environment for quality reasons, which I won't get into. But and you have to rasterize a file or process a file to go into that. And you lose that benefit of the raw environment. But I don't poo-poo Nik at all. I love Nik software because, even though I don't use it, because it's a great tool for photographers that are getting into understanding what the stylistic possibilities are for them, that are maybe new to this, to see what's possible. Nik software is a great program that has a lot of different, especially their black and whites program. They're seeing what all the possibilities are developmentally. But I don't use it because I know if I have an idea, as David has been talking about all night here, I have an idea that drives me to just use the stuff in Lightroom, and there's nothing I can do. There's nothing that Nick doesn't do that I can't just recreate in Lightroom. But I love the presets for that reason. I love Nick's software, and there's other programs out there that have presets just as a guideline. But the overriding principle, whether you're using presets or whether you're using Nick or whether you're using something else, is to over time, your goal is to try and stick within that raw environment, to keep your image in Lightroom as long as you can to get those quality benefits of staying in a raw converter,
while also being playful and keeping your mind open to other possibilities.
Yay. Well said. Thank you, David.
So, yes, we got to wrap this up because an hour and a half in, and my old fashioned, I am about to explode if I don't go to the little boys' room. But I want to say to Jason, thank you so much for inviting me. And we will do this again. And to those of you that have come that didn't know me, I would love to include you in my community and be part of your creative journey. And for those of you that have joined us because you've been following me for forever or for a very short time, it is an incredible privilege to be a part of your creative journey. So thank you.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for being here tonight. And I'll say something along those lines for those of you that don't know me. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for being a part of this. For those of you, as you saw from my emails, that weren't able to log in tonight or weren't even able to be here for some reason, we are recording the session and we're going to send an email out in tops 2 days, hopefully tomorrow, a link with a video to tonight's presentation so you can revisit what we talked about here. And if once isn't enough for you, you get to see it over and over again. But we'll send you a recording on this. And there is recordings already on my website, bradleyphotographic.com, from the last one with Eric Joseph, and the one before that, again, on masking AI. And there'll be recordings for the months and months ahead to come. So thank you all for being here. We will see you next time.
Take care all.